the laptops that are on Wi-Fi and our babies, again, are exposed. Cell phones, these virtual speakers, which are right by the beds of many families, from wireless video games that kids are playing, and iPads. And if you go around your house, there's this time in this world, so many devices, from smart lights to smart TVs, not just your cell phone. This is not just about our cell phone anymore. Wireless MP3 players, I'm sure you remember when they were simply not wireless, but now everything is wireless. Video games, smartwatches, wireless keyboard, wireless peripherals, Bluetooth, a Wi-Fi. Outside your window, there might be a cell tower. And if you live in Montgomery County, there can be cell antennas within 30 feet. No notice, no hearing. That's CTA 1907. So, oh, and your home cordless phone. I don't want to forget about that, but home cordless phones also emit wireless radiation, similar to your cell phone and to your Wi-Fi router. There's also wireless printers, and everything wireless emits radio frequency radiation, and that is absorbed into the bodies of whoever's near those devices. And if there's a cell tower near you, or even not as close where you can see it, but near you, you can be receiving that radio frequency into your body. Now, kind of briefly, before I talk about the case, because this is a part of our lawsuit, I want to explain how antiquated the rules are about how we test this radiation. So there is no pre-market safety testing for long-term safety. There was not for cell phones before they came on the market. But what they do is when a phone comes on the market, they have to test. You take one phone and you make sure that it meets these limits, which were set in 1996. And the way they do that is, what you're looking at is, it's a kind of a almost plastic, not quite plastic, fiber, a head made of a certain kind of material, phantom. And inside is a liquid, sugar liquid, a special liquid. Depending on the frequency, they put a different liquid in. It's a thick liquid. And then this is the thermometer that goes in the head. And this is the phone. And they put this thermometer in with the phone transmitting in certain positions. This is the position going this way. You can see that the edge and this edge are not touching the head. And actually there's an ear. You can't see it, but there's a little slab that represents the ear that keeps a space between the head and the phone. And this is taking the temperature to make sure that the temperature inside the head, the plastic dummy, does not increase a certain amount, which is part of the limits that we have for the FCC. I'm not going to go into details into this unless you want me to. I'm glad to go into deep details, but it's a certain level that the heat can go to in this plastic head in liquid. Now, this is based on the way that the FCC set these limits. Actually, they adopted limits based on industry-filled groups. Were based on animal studies done in the 60s and 70s, where they heated the animals up with microwave radiation. And when the animals stopped pressing a lever for food, they determined that was the level, that there was a behavioral effect. And they said, that's the level, and we're going to set limits based on this being the harmful effect, that the animals didn't continue searching for food. So, long story short, this is how we test phones. We do not test them touching the body. I'm going to show you a little bit more about that. But really importantly, this is a big head. This is not a child's head. This is an adult head. It actually represents a man at very large Marine, one of the bigger, stronger Marines, because these limits, our FCC limits, were based on protecting our military and radar when they were first developed. It's an adult man, not a child. Now, here is how we test for the body as well. You see this part here. You go underneath, you put the phone underneath with a spacer between the phone and the phantom in this liquid, And again, take a temperature to make sure that the temperature doesn't exceed the limits. So in our lawsuit against the FCC, we put on the FCC record the information documenting how the limits that we have that are based on heat only do not protect humans or the environment. First, they're based on heat and not biological effects. There are thousands of studies showing effects at levels which are not about heat. It's not about when you microwave your food. It's not about how hot it gets. It's about other biochemical changes, especially biochemical changes that can happen over time, that can, like a domino effect, or like in a cascading effect, our bodies, also the bodies of animals, trees, birds, and bees. Also, the research that's been used for these limits were based on adults, adult men, not children, and their unique vulnerability, which I'm going to talk about. They didn't consider impacts during pregnancy. You know, women are taking the phone and resting it on their abdomen, and the laptops on their abdomen. Did anyone look at that? Did anyone look at how the development of the fetus would be altered by all of this exposure? Of course, children have thinner skulls, and they also are more electrically conductive. Mammals, young mammals, have more liquid, they have more conductive tissues, actually. So they're not just smaller adults. They actually absorb the radiation deeper into their bodies. It penetrates into deeper into brain centers and at more intense levels. And of course, the way that we use devices now in 2021 is totally different than we did in 1996 when the limits were set. We remember phones used to be in holsters. However, and they still test phones as if they are in holsters with a space between the phone and the body. Phones are not tested in your bra. They're not tested in your spandex pants. They're not tested in your shirt pocket or your pants pocket or your back pants pocket. That is not how phones are tested. They're tested with a space between the phone and the body, actually, in the body. And they certainly don't consider effects on trees, birds, bees, or wildlife. They never were intended to, and yet we are proliferating all of these new cell towers in communities for 5G and the Internet of Things. But children absorb cell phone radiation deeper into their brains. But more than that, they have developing brains. So their brains are more vulnerable and more sensitive to wireless radiation. And here is an example. This is actually a simulation. This is not just using Photoshop to make a colorful image, but it's kind of like a heat map that engineers put together with state-of-the-art computers to show the electric field and how it penetrates into the different tissues of the body. And this is the microwave absorption into a 6-year-old child from a cell phone to the ear, showing the field propagating in space and as well going into, if you could slice your head, they actually do all these slices and they can see at any one point in the brain, in the skull, and the different tissues, what is the intensity of the field from the wireless radiation. And this is referencing several studies actually, but Fernandez 2018 found the younger models, the younger simulations of the younger child show higher absorption rates and exposures than the adult model. And as is stated by the American Academy of Pediatrics, which sent several letters to the FCC and the FDA on this over the years, the radio frequency energy deposition is 2 times into a child's brain and 10 times higher in the skull and the bone marrow in children compared to adults. And one of the areas that the FCC completely ignored that was pointed out by the court was the impacts to the developing brain. There is research showing decreased and damaged brain cells in animals exposed as adults and prenatally, altered brain activity that's an NIH study that found changes in the brain closest to the cell phone antenna. Decreased memory in teens has been found in a study out of Switzerland where they replicated prior work and actually really worked on addressing some of the limitations of the earlier study and found a change after 1 year in teenagers in terms of tests they did related to memory. And those tests were directly related to the part of the brain that would receive the most radiation. And they found in the teenagers that used the phone to their head, on one side of their head, related to that specific memory test, that they had damaged memory. And of course, if you've heard us talk before, there's the Yale study led by Dr. Hugh Taylor, chief of obstetrics at Yale, that found decreased memory and hyperactivity after prenatal exposure in mice. There's research showing behavioral problems in humans, human children, and human adults. Human children when the mothers had heavier cell phone radiation exposure, and as well as postnatally too. And hyperactivity and inattention in children after prenatal exposure. There's also research showing a possible synergistic effect where kids who had higher blood lead levels also had higher cell phone radiation exposure had more ADHD compared to kids who didn't have either of those.